and see you there. Today, let's talk about W204 C63 Special Editions.
The W204 C63 is one of the most iconic Mercedes of the 21st century and is perhaps the most recognizable model of the entire naturally aspirated 6.2-liter AMG V8 era. And for those of you fellow nerds out there, of course, I'm talking about the M156 V8. I could probably talk to you guys for hours about why I find the W204 C63 so special, but, if you're watching this video and are subscribed to my channel, there's a good chance you already feel the same way. Today, we're going to focus on all of the official special editions of the 204 C63, some of which are surprisingly not as obvious and well known as you'd imagine. I'm first going to talk about the pre-facelift special editions and then move on to the facelift ones, and there are actually quite a few more facelift ones than there are pre-facelift. And of course, despite my research, I can almost guarantee that I've missed at least one or two special editions, and maybe even more than that, so feel free to add those in the comments below. Alrighty, so let's begin with the pre-facelift C63. Your normal options were the base C63 or the P30 AMG Development Package C63. The Development Pack was simply an option for the C63, however it did include numerous upgrades such as a power bump, stiffer suspension dampening, a limited slip differential, and more like, red brake calipers, Alcantara, and all that good stuff. In 2011, P30 was replaced by the P31 package, which actually spec'd your C63 with the fancy forged internals from the SLS AMG. And that brings us to the Canadian market only Affalterbach Edition. The Affalterbach Edition was only sold in 30 units, which was very limited, and it was only sold in Canada as I mentioned earlier, but I'm sure some have made it across the US border. These were all equipped with P31 package and sold exclusively in Designo manual Allanite. It also included a carbon fiber interior trim, carbon fiber mirror caps, and a carbon fiber spoiler. The interior in all these cars was black with contrast red stitching, and they all had the 19-inch multi-spoke wheels finished in a satin black with a diamond-cut silver lip. This is overall a pretty nice package, and it reminds me of the later facelift C63 Edition 1, which was sold in the exact same manual Allanite color and even had the same wheels. Oh, and by the way, Designo paint is just Mercedes being fancy. It's their Italian high-end sort of exclusive paints. And Magno, which is spelled as Magno if you speak English like I do, is actually their satin paint. Next up is the Australian market, Edition 63. Now, for those of you not familiar, the Australian market is actually one of the most important markets for AMG as a whole and Mercedes as well, but AMG products do very, very well in Australia. In fact, you will see a couple more Australian-only models on this list later on. But this Edition 63 was sold in only 63 units very appropriately. It was sold in Designo Platinum Black, Designo Mystic White, and Designo Manual Allanite. This Manual Allanite color does keep coming up quite a bit, and it will continue to do so throughout this list. While researching this model, I couldn't really determine as whether or not it had the P30 package or not, but it does have the LSD, it does have the 19-inch multi-spokes, and lots of fancy interior touches, of which two were available. You could get either the Designo Red or Designo Tan interiors, but they had contrast stitching. What I found especially interesting about the Edition 63 is that you had this nice leather-covered dashboard, which was pretty much unheard of on most W204s, a very, very rare option to have, and most did not have it. In fact, some markets excluded this option entirely. Now for the UK-only DR520, a true oddball that might not technically count. The DR520 was only sold in 20 units, which is quite limited, with 15 sedans and 5 wagons, believe it or not. And I mentioned that the DR520 might not count because they were actually modified after these cars were produced, somewhat like Brabus does now, or what AMG themselves did before merging with Mercedes back in the day. These DR520s were based on the P30 package cars with new cranks and pistons. Now, one would think they could be P31 crank and pistons, but that didn't exist at the time, and the SLS would have been in very early production, so I'm not really sure where they got those components from, and they could be in-house produced. I'm not entirely sure. The DR520 produced, yep, you guessed it, 520 horsepower, making it the most powerful W204 C63 to leave the dealership brand new. The DR520 wasn't just limited to a power bump though, of course, as you got a lot more cool features such as a unique interior featuring black leather, black Alcantara with red stitching, lots of special DR520 embroidery and badging throughout the car. You also had titanium accents on the wheels and the grills. Oh yeah, and I should mention that Jensen Button had a matte black DR520 wagon. To conclude the pre-facelifts, we also have the one-off Concept 358 Jaffa for the 2010 Australian International Motor Show. The Concept 358 was intended for a limited production run, but unfortunately just ended up as being a one-off, which I think is quite sad, with that Eddy Ngo pearl orange paint looking absolutely stunning, along with some carbon fiber and blacked out accents. And now we move on to the Facelift C63, which brought on a new array of changes, including a new coupe model joining the sedan and wagon in the lineup. We also find that the Facelift brought on a new front end, an updated rear end, an entirely new interior, along with new transmissions, and some other updates along the way that actually made the car quite a lot different from the pre-facelift counterpart. The Facelift C63 also generated lots and lots of special editions, and I think this is because the W204 was coming to an end, which would represent the end of the M156 era for AMG, and they wanted a special way to commemorate that, and they knew that enthusiasts would enjoy cars like that. The Facelift C63 continued on with the base model as the entry level, however the P31 package was discontinued and actually replaced by the P61 package in the model year of 2014 for the USA and Canada with the Edition 507. The 507 was not limited by the number of units produced, however it was limited by model year in some capacity. The 507 sedan was only offered as a 2014 model year in the US, as that's when W204 production ended, at least for the sedan. Oh my gosh, could it be? A 507 with halogen headlights? Yeah, unfortunately those do exist, and quite a few of them do, which is unfortunate, but apparently it was due to some supply chain issues. The xenon headlights were not always available for installation during the 507 production run, and as a result, even some Black Series only have halogen headlights, which is just an atrocity. It looks horrible. Just looks absolutely horrible. Anyways, W204 coupe production lasted one more year, which means the 507 did as well, meaning the 507 coupe was actually for 2014 and 2015. This means that there was a point in time where you could have walked into the MB dealership and you could have had a choice of either a W205 C63 sedan or a W204 Edition 507 coupe. Like I mentioned earlier, there were no official production numbers released by MB USA or MB Global for the Edition 507. However, the forums have come to life over the last 10 years, and they've actually categorized pretty much every Edition 507 produced or at least sold in the US and Canada, along with other markets as well. Now, these numbers aren't official and they could potentially be incomplete. However, for the US and Canada, a total of 1,011 have been accounted for in the VIN registry for the Edition 507s. That means that there are 148 sedans and 746 coupes for both 2014 and 2015, at least for the coupe, 2014 for the sedan in the USA and Canada. I'll link down the forums below if you want to take a better look at more of the breakdown and production numbers and for other regions as well. Massive thanks to Eddie on VinWiki, on MB World, and on other Mercedes forums online that I've come across for assembling this VIN registry of Edition 507s. Very impressive work, and it's really helpful for all of us owners to actually kind of know how many there really are. The 507s featured the P31 engine, which was tuned up to 507 horsepower, the Black Series vented hood. You had black accents everywhere: the grille, the DRL surrounds, the mirror caps. You also had a bespoke interior with either piano black trim or carbon fiber with Napa leather and Alcantara. You also had a full Alcantara steering wheel with a black center marker. There was a pretty limited color palette, but the launch spec was in Eddy Ngo Manual Platinum, which was the only time this color was featured on the C63 W204. While Manual Platinum is very similar to Manual Allanite in terms of how it looks, I would say it's a bit darker and has a wider range of grays depending on the shade of light it's in. This color really shows off the aggressive lines on the C63, especially those widened front arches and the aggressive Black Series hood. There's also a beautiful one-off Edition 507 coupe in Eddy Ngo Manual Cashmere White, owned by Anthony Castro, also known as GotAMG on Instagram. This car was special ordered by MB USA in this Eddy Ngo Manual Cashmere White before it was eventually sold off to a dealer from MB USA themselves. Special thanks to Anthony for sending me some pictures of his car and also telling me how this car even existed in the first place.
Oh, did I forget to mention there's a 507 wagon? Because there's a 507 wagon, and that is supposedly the rarest of all 507s, 2014 only, and of course only available in certain markets. And I regret to say, not the US. We have not had a C-Class station wagon since the W203. In fact, we've only had the W203 wagon, or S203 more properly, with its very weirdly shaped rear end, and we never even got the AMG versions of it. Moving on.
Next up, we have the king of all W204 C63s, and that, of course, is the Black Series. Only 75 were sold in the US, and 800 were sold globally. This car received the full Black Series track focus treatment and is somewhat of a successor to the CLK 63 Black Series. These cars all had a custom wide body with these massive fender flares that had a nice lightweight focus. However, the US cars kind of got the short end of the stick. You see, all US cars have a massive, heavy glass panoramic sunroof that all W204 coupes have. The rumor is that MBUSA did not want to crash test one more W204 coupe that did not have a sunroof, as a result of which every single W204 coupe from Edition 507 to base model C250 to Black Series has this super heavy glass panoramic roof, which is prone to creaking. Ask me how I know that. The US spec cars were also stuck with the very heavy C63 comfort seats and did not get the Recaro pole positions that the Euro spec cars got, which, yeah, were also slick top, no sunroof in sight. Moving on, concluding my MBUSA rant, all Black Series had wider wheels, tires, a very cool vented hood which kind of looks like it has nostrils, which is also shared with the Edition 507. You had a large wing and canards with the aerodynamics package. The track package also improved cooling for the differential and engine oil as well. However, something strange is that you'll notice that every single C63 Black Series has an MB-Tex only interior. No leather for the most part, which is quite a contrast from something like the Edition 507. The Black Series also had the P31 engine tuned up to 510 horsepower, which is a whopping 3 more than the Edition 507. I should also mention that the Black Series had a completely revised suspension setup with stiffer bushings all the way around, KW Club Sport coilovers, which were used by AMG and for most Black Series models. The Black Series also lacked rear seats unless you spec'd them otherwise, which was a no-cost option to my understanding. Black Series values continue to soar, likely following the W209 CLK63 Black Series and the SLS Black Series as well. Given their limited production and just beautiful appearance with those widened fender flares, it's no surprise these things are absolute collector's items. And I must add, they are very fun to drive and do not feel anything like a normal C63 from my experience. I can't mention the C63 Black Series without mentioning the Solarbeam yellow paint. Now, this was never actually offered to the public, however there are a few cars in Solarbeam that do exist. Most of these examples that are Solarbeam today have been resprayed to match that color in the SLS Black Series, and I believe only one was actually factory painted in Solarbeam yellow, and that's the car we saw driven by the press for the most part at the launch of the C63 Black Series. It seems to me like such a missed opportunity for Mercedes not to offer this color from new, but I guess when you consider that the color cost about $10,000 US or more depending on the market you're in, it would have significantly increased the price of the car to where it may not have been worth it for somebody, but I think people still would have bought that color regardless. Now that we've gotten the 507 and Black Series out of the way, we can move on to the more limited stuff, which I think not everyone may know about. That brings us to the Edition 1 of the Facelift W204, which was limited to the US market only. That comprised of 60 sedans, all in Eddy Ngo manual Elanite, with the base engine, not P31, which is an odd choice. And in fact, I believe the LSD was not even an option for the Edition 1 facelift sedan. On the contrary, all 100 Edition 1 coupes were in Eddy Ngo Night Black, and they did have P31. All of these cars had black multi-spoke wheels. These cars also had special badging in the interior, and they had a bespoke steering wheel, which was red and black leather. Next up is the Legacy Edition. This was produced at the very end of the W204 production run. It was based on the 507 but sold in South Africa only. It was in Viper Green Manual, which is sort of a precursor to Green Hell Manual, which we saw in the AMG GTR much later. These cars featured black painted calipers, a Black Series wing, Viper Green Manual accents on the 507 19-inch forged wheels, and lots of little details everywhere else. The Legacy Edition was only produced in 10 units, and I know at least one has been crashed, so a very rare C63, and it's kind of a strange one with that color and the Black Series wing. In my opinion, the Black Series wing on the normal body C63 does look a bit odd, but it is still very cool. I do prefer the examples that did not have the wing. I have seen some people remove that, so that's pretty cool to see. Coming up next is one of the Performance Studio editions. This one was Japan only, sold in Eddy Ngo Manual Night Black with P31 package. It had the 19-inch multi-spokes in satin black with red lips, which is an odd choice. It had a Eddy Ngo red and black interior with red stitching and carbon fiber, and also lots of red accents throughout the car. This is certainly one of the stranger ones and perhaps more tame of the special editions, but it was one I didn't know about at all, and still fun to learn about. It was unclear to me how many Performance Studio editions were actually produced, and on top of that I couldn't quite find any real pictures of the car, so I suppose on used Japanese car websites that could be the place to find them, but I just could not find one for the life of me. So moving on to the next one is also a Japan exclusive, the quote-unquote limited edition. Very creative name here. 35 units only. These cars were white with red mirrors, and red spoilers, which is a bit of an odd touch. These were all P31 package with 20 sedans and 15 coupes, and I could find quite a few of these on the used car market in Japan. So I'm not quite sure if that Performance Studio Edition is just very rare, or perhaps it's just a one-off. The next one is actually called the Black Series Performance Studio Edition, also for Japan. Only 20 of them exist, and they're all in Designo Magno Cashmere White, much like Anthony's 507. But outside of that and a small stripe on the side of the car with the AMG lettering, it doesn't seem like much else was done to these cars. It just seems like a spec for a Black Series. But on the topic of strange Magno Cashmere White C63 Black Series, there was also the planned Ducati edition. However, the partnership between AMG and Ducati quickly ended when the Volkswagen Audi Group purchased Ducati, and there was not going to be any more Ducati edition. However, the spec was to be Magno Cashmere White, and only 5 units, but that kind of did still happen, as the Canadian market did receive these 5 units of Magno Cashmere White with, I believe, a similar stripe to the Performance Studio Edition in Japan, but it just wasn't called the Ducati Edition anymore, so it kind of still exists, but unofficially. Here we have the C63 Austria Edition, of which only 15 were produced, for the Austrian market of course. Now, this is a car that I simply would not know exist had YYC 6.3 on Instagram not sent a picture of a family friends in a W204 group chat, funnily enough. After learning about this model even existed, I had to use German websites and German used car websites along with Austrian ones to actually find any evidence of this car being real, which I did find some pictures, and it does look quite nice. So on the German websites that I found, it seems like the car could be spec'd as either a base C63 or a P31. Quite a nice touch to see extended leather on the door cards and dash of the W204 facelift. These cars also had an Austria silhouette emblem on the gear selector, which looks pretty nice as well. These cars had special badging throughout, and they had red illuminated door sills, which is not something I've seen at all on a W204. So despite flying kind of under the radar, this special edition does have some pretty unique touches even amongst the other special editions that maybe have even more press than this one does. And now we have the Performance Studio Taiwan Edition. These were limited to 10 units for the Taiwanese market exclusively, all of which were in Designo Magno Night Black. These all had the base engine, so no P31, which I always find to be a strange choice for a special edition. These also did have the 19-inch black multi-spoke wheels. They also had a black leather interior with carbon fiber, along with some nice red stitching and red piping. They also had some special etched door sills. But as you can tell, outside of some minor spec things and perhaps a small unique cosmetic details, there's not much to this Performance Studio Edition. And back to the Japanese market, we have the C63 Performance Studio Special Edition 1 of 1, which was debuted at the Tokyo Auto Salon in 2014. Not much is really known about this car other than cosmetics. I really can't tell any details of it. Whatever information I could find was in Japanese, and it wasn't really clear in the translations either. But it seems to be there's only pictures available. I'm not sure what happened to this car. I'm guessing it was sold off to some lucky customer in this very special green color, but I couldn't even tell you the specific name of this green because I cannot find a name anywhere. But it looks like the wheels have their lips matched to the paint of the car, along with some other details like a banner on the windshield, and the seemingly signature AMG Performance Studio side stripe as we've seen on the previous Black Series special editions as well. And finally, last and potentially least, unfortunately, is this 1 of 1 C63 507 Performance Studio Edition for the Australian market. And, well, just look at it. It looks like a clown spec. You have the red and white. The interior is also red and white. It's just a very strange, bright contrast of colors, and it doesn't quite look right to me. And you have this terrible 507 inscription in the floor mats, and I feel like the ideas were interesting, but the execution was poor, if you know what I mean. There are even red inserts in the silver wheels. It just goes a bit too far for my taste, but maybe someone out there likes it, so that's good for you, but I don't think most people do enjoy the look of this thing. It would be absolutely egregious of me to make a video about C63 Special Editions and to not mention the Brabus C-Class V12s. You see, there's actually 2 different variants that Brabus built, where they shoved a V12 inside a C-Class W204. The first of which is based on the Prefacelift sedan, where they took the M275 V12 out of a 65 AMG, for example, or even a 600, and they bored it out to 6.2 liters and got 720 horsepower out of this twin-turbo V12. Later on, with the Brabus Bullit CV12, they extracted 790 horsepower, and this was based on the W204 facelift coupe. Now,
These were just their examples, but back at this time, Brabus would pretty much do whatever you wanted. But this was also back in the day when Brabus was known to just shove a V12 into whatever you wanted, including a GLK for that matter. Both of these Brabus V12 W204s would likely cost over $500,000 back in when they were new, which adjusted for inflation to 2024 from 2012 is almost $700,000, so we're talking about a near $1 million W204 C-Class. And they could do a terrifyingly fast 220 plus miles per hour. Wait, no, how did I forget about this? Look at this. Look at this. This is the Halloween edition C63 Black Series. Why does this exist? And it's middle of October right now. This is perfect. Oh my gosh. Well guys, that's pretty much all I've got for you today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Leave a like if you did, and consider subscribing for more content like this, and maybe a V12 Brabus video where they shove V12s into every Mercedes chassis known to man, along with AMG DIYs from tasks as simple as an oil change to doing something as complex as pulling an engine, because I have done both of those things on this channel with the M156. Oh yeah, and be sure to let me know if I did miss any special editions in the comments below. I'm actually genuinely curious to see if I did. With all that being said, I will see you guys in the next one.